Here we go. Nice. Okay, great. Yes, let's go ahead and get started. Kai, if you could queue up the slides, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, let me just pull up my notes. We're getting started. Thank you for bearing with us also every single time I have to like really orient myself with the technology. And now it looks like we're ready. Okay, so welcome everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started with our webinar, which is called How to Quit Plastics. There are, let's see, 108 of you currently still climbing, tuning in tonight. And so in order to accommodate all those numbers, we do Zoom in a webinar style. So that means that your mic is off, your camera is off, but we can communicate through the chat box, which you've already been great about, and the Q&A feature. So there should be a chat box and a Q&A box, which is like two little things. And so please use the chat box to comment, interact with other folks, maybe share a resource, chime in with experiences, anything else you'd like to kind of communicate to the group. Please note that when you chat, you can either send it to everybody, so everyone on the call, which is 109 people so far, or just panelists, which will just be me and Kylie. So just know that there's a difference there of who you're talking to. And then if you have a question that you'd actually like to get answered during the question section of this webinar at the end, please go ahead and put it in the Q&A box, and then we can like really make sure we address it because the chat box is just doing this. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Next slide, please, Kylie. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Ecocycle sits upon land within the territories of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. And further, we acknowledge that 48 contemporary tribal nations are historically tied to the lands that make up the state of Colorado. Next slide, please. So this webinar is part of the Programming for Eco Leaders, which is our group of trained zero waste community educators and ambassadors. I said that weird, ambassadors. But these webinars are open to anyone who ever wants to come now and forever. So I'll send out a big email full of follow-up resources and the recording of this webinar and the slide deck, which I do my very best to write out my notes of what I'm actually saying after this. So really don't worry if you're like missing something, if you missed a note, or if you're trying to take a picture or anything like that, or if you want to share it, we're recording it and I'll send it all out. This webinar is the second in a two-part series. The first of which was way back in May. That feels like a really long time ago. But I split it into two pieces because the plastics crisis in which we find ourselves is really at its roots systemic. And I'll give a bit more context on that tonight. But I just want everyone to be aware that there is a whole other webinar talking about the systemic end of this conversation, since it's really crucial that we're talking about, just scoot my chair forward. It's crucial that we're talking about the systemic end of this conversation and the decades-long, roots of the fossil fuel industry and politics and marketing schemes, and not just individual failures as the root of this problem. So I'll send out the recording of that webinar along with the recording of this one tonight, again with all the resources that I'll mention and the slides. So with that said, let's do a quick agenda overview. We're going to start out with some context about the climate crisis, who is Ecocycle, and then a quick note on that systemic piece of our conversation tonight, as well as a note on privilege and where individual power does come into play. We're going to then really dig into like the hands-on how to quit plastics stuff, like how can you go into your house, find out what plastics you have, and then wean yourself off of them. So we're going to talk about the home audit. Then we're going to talk about how to, once you've identified what plastics you have, how to swap them out for something not plastic or not disposable. We're going to talk about zero waste and bulk shopping. So that includes things like bringing your own stuff. I heard somebody said that in the chat earlier, that they would love to hear about tearing containers and things like that. We're going to talk about sneaky plastics really quick, and then dig into plastics literacy and recycling, which just means being literate in telling what kind of plastics you're dealing with, how to tell the difference between them, how to know generally what's recyclable and what isn't, a guide to greenwashing, giving producer feedback, and then I like to end with a good news segment, and then we're going to do questions. So again, know that your questions will be addressed at the end as long as you're putting them in the Q&A box. So yeah, if you're thinking of a question and you just put it in the chat, it might get lost. So be sure to put it in Q&As, the Q&A box, and then we will we will talk about it at the end. So we talked about Ecocycle's role a bit in the earlier webinar, the first part of this webinar. But before we jump in tonight, I'll just give you a very brief overview so you know who we are as a community resource and you know kind of the source of this information tonight. So Ecocycle was founded in 1976 as a grassroots movement, a movement which successfully created the first curbside recycling program in Colorado and one of the very first in the nation. And today we're a nonprofit zero waste and resource conservation organization. We operate the Boulder County Recycling Center over on 63rd and Arapahoe, and the Center for Hard to Recycle Materials. You might know it as CHARM, which is just across the street in Boulder. And we have programs for outreach, education, and infrastructure for schools, businesses, neighborhoods, communities, events. And we also do legislation and infrastructural work on the community, state, national, and global level as one of the original nonprofit recyclers and zero waste organizations in the US. And I love the pictures of the original buses, which were our original hauling trucks. Next slide, please. Thank you. So before we move into the bulk of the presentation, I've just been wanting to hold space in my webinars to acknowledge climate anxiety and the very real and heavy mental toll that I'm sure we're all feeling as activists and as people who feel responsible for this planet and future generations and current generations. And I tend to really be like a zero waste cheerleader persona on my webinars and like out in the public. Because I genuinely am energized by people like you, and I'm obviously a huge nerd about all of this content, but I don't want to ignore that, you know, being an environmentalist and a social activist can be a hugely emotionally heavy load to carry. And so I don't want to, in all of these webinars, I do my very best not to sugarcoat things, but I do want to leave you feeling empowered and inspired and supported, rather than just like, oh, cool, everything is plastic and we're all gonna drown in it. That won't be the tone for tonight. So here are some climate anxiety resources that I will send out. So don't worry about copying these links or clicking them right now or anything like that. I will send it out, but I just want you to know that that is part of it. And I want to kind of preface our conversation with that moving forward in these webinars. So throughout this webinar, we will be talking a lot about this workbook that you see here. So I just wanted to show it to you because while we're not going to be kind of physically working through it in this webinar, it is kind of how it's structured, because we built this workbook for you. And while you don't have to use the workbook, you don't have to like be a workbook person. That's just kind of how we're structuring it. So I just wanted you to see it. You will all get your own digital copy, which is also designed to be printed. Again, I'll send that out at the end. And it is very in-depth as a standalone tool. Like it has a bunch of its own copy and a bunch of its own background and stuff, but we'll be working through it so you feel ready and inspired to work through it to the extent that you feel called to or able to. And next, yeah, we're gonna start with some context. So as I mentioned earlier, this webinar is part of a two-part series, the first of which talked all about the systemic nature of this issue and unpacking the political and infrastructural and marketing tactics used by the plastics industry to create this problem over decades, all while convincing us that as individuals that it's our fault. And so, as I said, I'll send you that recording. It is an hour and a half. So if you are, if you're curious, there's a lot of content there, but I wanted to include a slide in this one, setting context for those of you who didn't watch it or who didn't watch it yet. And I'll use an example that those of you who did watch it haven't heard yet, or I at least didn't tell you yet, so as not to bore you. But let's quickly give some context to this issue. This is a photo taken in 1912 of irons that were discarded as newer, more technologically advanced irons were coming out. Okay, so quick context. Here's a very creepy real advertisement from Dixie Cup. Yes, our context here is that plastics are life-changing. And many of those ways that plastics change our lives many of those things were positive, right? Like many medical advancements were based on plastics, you know, going to space. There's a lot of things that we've done thanks to plastic, and we've done them better than we used to. But single-use plastics is not one of those things. Single-use plastics never filled a real demand. Think about if an engineering student came to you with this thing that has the shortest possible use, but the longest possible lifespan, you would probably fail that student on that project. It's not really, doesn't really make a lot of sense, but it wasn't a failed design though. It's not that it happened on accident. It's not that a grad student messed up and didn't think it through. Single-use plastics are designed this way on purpose, and they have always been designed this way on purpose for capital gain on behalf of the packaging industry. And so they fabricated this culture of linear consumerism and banked on planned obsolescence. They planned the obsolescence. And post-war, people were necessarily resourceful, right? Packaging tended to be durable and more uniform and more frequently reused, and people reused them and they conserved them. And that wasn't profitable enough for the plastics and packaging industry though, because once the packaging was making it into these households, it tended to stay there, effectively reducing the demand to continue buying that thing. So the American plastics and packaging industry designed this shift in values. So it's not that they're designing even a physical, like it's not that they're even redoing the physical design of the package, they're designing this shift in values, this cultural phenomenon that circulated goods through rather than into households, into the consumer realm. And so the truism that humans are inherently wasteful came into being at a particular time and place by design. It's not something that we are born with. It's not something that is inherent to the human species. So Lloyd Stouffer, the editor of Modern Packaging magazine, famously addressed plastics industry representatives at this conference in Chicago in 1963. I'll send out these sources. This is his quote, though. It sounds like he might be being sarcastic. It might sound like a quote, a speech that one of us might do to packaging industry folks, but he, as a packaging industry person, was not meaning this ironically. He said, "You are filling the trash cans, the rubbish dumps, and the incinerators with literally billions of plastic bottles, plastic jugs, plastic tubes, plastic bags and films and sheet packages, and now even plastic cans." Oh, well done, plastic cans. "The happy day has arrived when nobody any longer considers the plastic package too good to throw away. For the package that is used once and thrown away, like a tin can or a paper carton, represents not a one-shot market for a few thousand units, but an everyday recurring market measured by the billions of units." And this is his very famous line from this. "Your future in packaging lies in the trash can." So, and he means that in a good way. So he's saying, fellow packaging industry people, we have to be designing for the trash can. It's not that it happened inadvertently. They did that on purpose, once again, to get goods through households rather than into, when inherently folks are tending to keep the packages in their home, reusing them, reducing all of that stuff. So there's really, based on this quote, you know, he's not hiding that it's greed. He's describing this carefully fabricated culture that they created and then proceeded to celebrate, as we can see. And again, I'll send out more information about that that quote and that conference. But my main point for this slide, as we begin to talk about what each of us can do to do better as individuals, is that humans are not inherently wasteful. And I hear this a lot. I hear this every single day in my job doing outreach for Ecocycle. I just hear people are too lazy and people are too stupid and people are too wasteful. And again, I'd point to my first webinar for this one, just if you want more information and you haven't seen it. But this last example that you can look up, and I'll send you the citation, is that in 1917, when communal sanitized tin cups were replaced in public spaces like train stations with disposable Dixie cups, there were not only riots, but there were riots by soldiers, because in their eyes, in the soldiers' eyes, in America, in the United States, this wastefulness was just un-American. It was unnatural, and it wasn't what they had been fighting for. And so we see that not only was this linear, cultural consumerism fabricated by those who it would economically benefit the most, but there was severe resistance because people are not inherently wasteful. It did not come naturally to them. And when that resistance was ultimately overcome through economic power, mostly, and political, they were able to build this infrastructure that now is nearly impossible for us to break out of or find alternatives to. But it's not that it was filling some long standing demand because humans are wasteful. So I just want to validate that you are not, and your fellow humans are not. And you can do this, and they can too. So if this infrastructural and marketing scheme didn't have real success until the 1950s, single-use plastics is really a phenomenon that exists within living memory. And so that is to say, not only do we know that there was a way to do things successfully before we had all these single-use plastic packages, but there are people alive today who remember them. They were there. Even if you weren't alive in the 50s, even if you remember different packages in the 70s, I bet you remember, things looking different. So we don't have to, have Elon Musk offer up a prize of $1 million for someone who can come up with a compostable alternative to the banana packaging we see here. This is obviously like it's kind of funny, but we truly are just like, we don't need to do that much. We can just kind of go back to what we had before, what already works well. And so the problem, again, with single-use plastics was never a necessity. These bananas do not need to be in this polystyrene thing. We do have, by the way, a whole webinar about food waste and why packaging sometimes prevents that, just so you know, and I can send that out. But my point is that this was never based on supply and demand, and all we need to do is buck these systems forced upon us, both collectively and individually, and then we can have our bananas again, for God's sake. Next slide, please. Okay, so all of that said, the individual level, I do a lot of talking about the systemic problems with plastics, and I talked for an hour and a half about it like 2 months ago. But that is not to say that the individual level doesn't matter. We as individuals do have immense power, and we can make a difference certainly in this crisis. So there are, last I checked, like 7.7 billion people in the world. And so if we all use, for example, as a basic example, a single-use coffee cup every single day, that's a huge amount of trash created from a bunch of individual actions. Again, even though it's not our fault that that's the system that we live in. So don't let anyone tell you that your zero waste efforts are in vain or that it doesn't matter, because every single one of us makes 1 million decisions a day, and there's 7.7 billion of us. And throughout our lifetimes, or even just over a year, we could either waste or save a huge amount of resources. And your decisions have an impact. Your decisions have an impact, and we all have to keep that in mind. Because if we all think we're not making a difference as individuals, of course, we won't be able to move toward these collective solutions that we're talking about. But when I make this point, I want to be clear that you making an effort to reduce your own waste as an individual doesn't stop there. It's not just making a difference in the physical amount of waste that you generate. You're sending a market signal when you do this, and you're making a statement by voting with your dollar every single time you take these actions. And it is being received by the packaging industries with whom we interact a whole lot. We are trying to change this norm, these systems, of which you are an early adopter. And so essentially you as waste conscious consumers are leading this revolution that must happen. And the packaging industry is clamoring in response as they watch their decades of careful deception crumble with this new wave of consumerism, which rejects what they've forced upon us, right? We're reclaiming the energy of the people who are writing about the Dixie cups. And so that said, I want to just add a note on privilege here. It's amazing to do the challenge where you only use enough trash per year to, fill a single mason jar. A lot of people do that. It's amazing. It is. That's amazing that you can make that happen. And it's also a very privileged thing to be able to do. And as I said, these are systemic infrastructural issues imposed upon us, and it's very hard to break out of that. And the folks who are successful in doing that do so on an individual level because they have the ability to do so, and many folks don't have access to that privilege. So some folks might not have access to shop at stores where products are available in bulk because zero waste stores sometimes are more expensive, or they're not going to be in lower income communities, things like that. So while we want to do everything we can to divest from plastics, and that's what we're talking about tonight, let's continually keep in mind that we have to be setting up everyone for success through these systemic changes. And we can't be reserving the right to a plastic-free existence to folks who can afford it. And with that, zero waste doesn't have to be expensive to-go mugs and bamboo cutlery. It can mean, bringing your fork from home and a napkin, like an old t-shirt as a napkin, whatever you want, reusing a glass jar of spaghetti sauce as a to-go mug, mason jar, purchasing less expensive thrifted items. These are there are a lot of zero waste lessons to be learned from folks who've been doing this for a long time who aren't necessarily being celebrated as zero waste champions. They're doing it out of resource conservation and cost saving. And so this movement is not reserved. It shouldn't be reserved for one type of person. And it's important, as always, for us to be inclusive and intersectional as much as we can, and acknowledge and celebrate all acts of resistance to plastics. It doesn't have to look like a neat pantry full of matching jars. Okay, so the fun stuff. Let's jump into how to quit plastics. We will start with step 1, the home audit. So the first step in tackling any challenge is to step back and look at what the actual problem is. Look at what you're dealing with. So the best way to start reducing your waste is to actually take a look at what you're using and throwing away. And these are the steps that the workbook will walk you through. So step 1, you're going to collect your trash and your recycling over a week or so. Maybe a little more if you've already been working on reducing your waste for a while. You might not have that much over a week, whatever seems like a good kind of cross section of your consumer habits. Make sure it's like an average week. It's not a week where somebody's visiting you or the finals week or something like that. Or you just had a baby, anything like that. We just want it to be representative of your consumptive habits. And it helps me to go through it first in my kitchen and then in my bathroom and then in any other bin there might be in the house, just because it's easier to categorize it that way, but you can of course do it any way you want. So step 2 is just to go through it. So pick either trash or recycling and then go through it item by item, figure out what you're looking for. I'm including recycling because even if an item is recyclable, that doesn't mean we can't reduce it, right? Which is what we have to do before recycling. Reduce, reuse, recycle isn't just like a cute tagline. It's a hierarchy of waste disposal from the EPA way back when. So reduce, reuse, recycle. Recycle comes after reduce. It's important for us to still look at our recycling and not just bank on recycling all of our plastics rather than reducing them. And then step 3, you're going to use your audit workbook, which you don't have to, but I'll show you in just a sec, to record your most common items. And so you'll see on the worksheet, and I'll show you this in just a moment, that it asks what the item is, how much you use it, if it's plastic or not, and if there's an alternative. And so these are just questions to kind of get your wheels turning. There's no like one right answer to any of these. It's just so you can adjust according to what you'd like to accomplish. And so if your goal is to get rid of plastics, pay attention to that question, the is it plastics question. If your goal is to get rid of disposables in general, maybe that question will hold a little bit of less weight, right? If you want to focus on cutting your trash down and tackling recycling second, maybe that's something you pay attention to. We'll talk about the alternatives, literally, okay, this is what I have, what do I swap it for, in the next few slides. But the last question on the workbook is whether this item is essential to your well-being. And so we'll talk about this a tiny bit later too, but we included this question because I get a lot of folks who are guilty about, their meds being shipped in a foam cooler to their house every day, every week, or, the tubes in their CPAP machine not being recyclable, things like that. And I always say, hey, I appreciate that, but there's a lot of work to be done. And this isn't your fault. You didn't ask for this. And there are lots of low-hanging fruit we can tackle before we start to feel guilty about our medications and things which are essential to our well-being. Like, we don't have to worry about your CPAP tube just yet. When you order food to your house where you presumably have forks, they'll hand you a plastic fork wrapped in plastic. That's the example I use all the time because I think it's so stupid. But anyway, I just want to kind of, if something is essential to your well-being, if you're checking that box, just don't worry about that item just for now. There are other things to worry about first, and then you can cross that bridge when we get to it. So step 4 is, it's a fun one. It's the most stressful one for many people, but if it really doesn't have to be. If you're coming away with anything from this webinar, it's that on your journey to reduce your plastic use, just start with the least intimidating one, the easiest one. And that's not to say that like we all should just be taking like the easiest road, but to start out, it's really important in longevity and sustainability, in mental health, as an activist and someone who's trying to still survive. We want to be celebrating our little wins and start with the easiest things. So yeah, the most important thing to do is tackle this in bite-sized approachable pieces. So pick one item to start with and go from there. If you're seeing a lot of single-use coffee cups, but you know you could easily bring your mason jar or reusable mug, start with that one. Pick an item that has an alternative that would be easy for you to swap. Even if you find one item that you dispose of more than the others, you don't have to start with it if it would be a hard one to reduce or swap out for something else. Start with the easy stuff, work up from there. If you're rolling your eyes at me right now, thinking like, okay, amateur hour, my trash isn't full of disposable coffee cups. I'm way beyond that. I promise there's always a lowest hanging fruit. And no matter how far along you are on your kind of zero waste, breaking free from plastic journey, there will always be something that you can learn from an audit. And there will always be an easiest thing to start with, even if it's not as easy as a single-use plastic cup being swapped for a reusable. That is an example of just start with things that are easy and give you endorphins to look at the rest. Okay, so then step 5 is using all our alternatives offers, our list, which I'll talk about in the next page, or your own research, or research is what I just said, or your own research, or if you can just reduce that thing altogether. If you're like, I don't even really care about, like, why do I even eat so many of these bars? I don't even like them. Like, if it's reducing, that's great. Yeah, we're just going to figure out what we're going to do with instead of that item. And then 6 is focusing on that item. We're going to work on phasing it out over a month. If it's easier for you and you do it over a week, that's great. We just have our workbook set up so that you can record your items one by one. And so then you're kind of tracking your progress, you're tracking your goals. And again, if you're not a workbook person, that's totally fine. We just want to relay that the best way to approach this in our storied experience is to do this audit and then tackle the items one by one, easiest to hardest, so we don't get overwhelmed, burned out, discouraged, and give up altogether. It's not, the idea of Plastic Free July is not just like be plastic free for a month and then stop. It's all about building support so that you can maintain a lifestyle which is resistant to single-use plastics. Okay, next slide, please. I'm scanning the chat because I'm interested, but I can't lose my focus. Okay, so Kylie, I'm sorry, could you just go back one just for a sec? Okay, great. So this is just a photo of what the audit workbook on the workbook looks like. There's also one for trash. And as I said, you list the item, how often you're seeing it in your bin, whether it's essential to you, and whether there's an alternative you know of or one provided in our list, which we're about to go through. So I see like you guys are listing like specific stores and items. We're about to do that. Don't worry, we're gonna nerd out on these anti-plastic items. And then next slide, please, Kai. So this is just a look at the tracking sheet we described. You can only see July and August here, but it's, again, it's just to give you kind of structure, if it's helpful to you, to be tracking what you're working on, and even look back on your progress and like, haha, isn't it funny that I ever used to use these single-use items? Now, next slide, please, Kylie. Now we're really going to talk about how to swap out those plastics now that you know what they are, for alternatives, or how to reduce them, how to do something else. So we're going to start with the kitchen and groceries. So these are all pages in the workbook. This is all listed. Like, you don't have to take a picture of this. I will send this to you. It's on your workbook. You can interact with it. And we have more resources too. This isn't exhaustive, but we're just doing it category by category. Again, you can do it however it makes sense to you. But this is things you might start in your kitchen. And just so you guys know, as a nonprofit, we can't just like name one single brand for all of these, but I'm going to try to provide enough examples and enough info so that you could find all of these. So yeah, and we'll talk about specific stores too. Don't worry about that. Okay, so water bottle. Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm going to go through them. So water bottle is an easy one. Again, if you're thinking amateur hour, there is no wrong way to start. There's no wrong point to start your journey. Water bottle is a good one to start with to make yourself feel good and reduce your waste and start out on a strong note. You can, bring your own when you go out. If you are someone who needs or wants a filter, a charcoal water filter is a good non-plastic one to look at. Granola bar wrappers is one that we often find in our kitchen audits. And we have make your own bars. So in this workbook, we also have like a bunch of DIY recipes for things like for granola bars and like bubble bath, like there's a bunch of things. I will say though, that if you're like, you think I have time to make granola bars every week? I think another point here is that if you're looking at your snacks and you're like, I'm buying all these granola bars, is there just another snack that would do the trick? You know, like it doesn't have to be a granola bar, but is there just something else that could step in for that, for which there is a good plastic-free alternative, you know, for which there is packaging that's not single-use individual wrap. Oatmeal canister is kind of a bummer. If you don't know, oatmeal canisters tend not to be recyclable because they have the same kind of coffee cup paper plastic lining thing. But that's a great one to buy in bulk, and you can bring your own container. Same with pasta and cereal, nut butter and jelly and applesauce. Even if your swap is just like, instead of buying a plastic, I'm going to try to look for a glass jar. Again, a note on privilege. They tend to be more expensive if they're packaged in glass over plastic. And that's part of the systems that we're trying to break free from, the subsidies and all that. You can make your own applesauce. There's a lot of kind of glass alternatives here. Chip bags is kind of like granola bar wrappers. You can make your own, but like if there's another, like just pretzels that come in bulk from a gravity fed container, you know, that you can swap out for chips, that's a good one. Beverage cans and bottles. One of my favorite plastic free hacks is getting a growler and then going to like fill my kombucha on tap at natural grocers rather than buying a bunch of kombucha individual bottles. Shopping bags is an easy one. Invest in a reusable bag. You can make your own. There's I tend to bring a bunch, and like if someone behind me doesn't have a bag, I'll just be like, oh, you're in luck, like here's a bag, because I have 7 million of them. You can get creative also with bags, like, you know, make them out of an old shirt. You don't have to go buy like a fancy cooler one from Whole Foods or whatever. Plastic milk and juice jugs. Somebody said Longmont Dairy. That's a really good one. So if there is an option near you, like Longmont Dairy, where you can do a deposit system, they do this at Nude Foods as well, which I'll talk about. Then that's great. Look for your local infrastructure. Try to tap into, the farmers around you and who is, you know, locally producing this food. You can also make your own nut milk and buy the nuts in bulk. Again, this is all like, take what calls to you, reject what you don't have time for and you can't do for now. Lettuce and greens clamshells containers is another one that tends to show up a lot in kitchens, and we forget there's a lot of options to buy our greens naked. We don't have to put them in these clamshell packaging as much as we do. You can put them right in your bag. You can bring a reusable produce bag. This is another thing we'll touch on later. Tea bags and coffee pods, you can buy both of those in bulk. You can use a reusable tea steeper, and then Ziploc bags and saran wrap. We have beeswax wraps, reusable cloth sandwich wraps. There's a bunch of local companies in the Boulder area, like Kala Cloths and a bunch of beeswax brands. But anyway, these are all things that if you Google them, you should be able to come up with some results. Let's go to the bathroom. Sorry, I said it like that. Oh, somebody said yogurt. Yeah, we didn't include that in the kitchen one. I'm not sure what, we couldn't write everything. This was just like our top ones that we were finding. But they do sell yogurt more and more in glass jars. Again, if you can find like a local dairy, if you can make your own. I actually know a lot of eco leaders who make their own yogurt in a slow cooker. So that is very cool. Okay. And then floss is a big one for the bathroom. Floss tends to be plastic. There is a compostable floss option. So there is, I wish I had it. I should have gotten for my bathroom, but it's like a little spool of compostable, like vegan floss. And then you put it in a little glass jar, and then you just keep reusing the little tiny jar, and then you just refill the little spool. There's also like water flossers. That's a cool one. soap bottles and shampoo and conditioner bottles are really good if you have access to a refill store, which again, I'll name some specifics in a sec. But also I think we tend to think about these soaps as being necessarily in liquid form when in the past it was not so. They tended to be more in bar form, and that is what we could do now, and what a lot of companies are getting back to. Like, you know, Lush is like all about having just bars, but yeah, there are a lot of shampoo bars and soap bars and like dishwashing bars. There's a lot of cool stuff, and they really, I mean, I have really, you can't really tell, but I have really curly hair and I use shampoo bars and they work really well. Plastic razors, there are metal safety razors that I love. I think they're very cool, and and they last forever. And you can replace the little, you know, straight razor, and it's a lot cheaper than a plastic one. That said, again, if you're like, that is scary, or like physically I'm not able to use one, totally fine. Don't worry about it. Choose a different one. Toothpaste tubes, look for toothpaste tablets and tooth powder. I heard a lot of people sounding off about these in the comments, that they are obsessed with like their Bite, or like, yeah, their local tooth powder at their zero waste shop. There's a lot of really creative things being done around toothpaste specifically. And so toothpaste tubes are not recyclable. They're not, for many reasons, but so this is a really great swap if this is something that you're finding, to look for these tablets and powders and like figure out what your favorite is. The toothbrush itself, there are like bamboo toothbrushes, which are compostable at the end of their lives. There are, you know, plastic. If you want to go plastic, there's a plastic, there's ones made of recycled plastics. There are, you know, of course, more durable ones that you can just like swap out the head for. So it's just less plastic that you're throwing away. I think most of us, when we visit the dentist, are just automatically handed a plastic toothbrush. And I think it's a good opportunity to have to like refuse, you know, the plastic toothbrush at your dentist. And also, if you're up for it, having a conversation with them about like, would you consider adopting an upon request only policy for handing out these plastic toothbrushes? Or, you know, I could show you more environmentally friendly ones to hand out. Yeah, Zoe just said my dentist has started giving out bamboo toothbrushes. Like anything you can do to be a resource for them, that's great. You know, get to the source. Somebody had a question about fluoride. In the toothpaste, I have seen brands that do have it, so I know that exists. I don't have a specific brand, but yeah, Tom's of Maine says their toothpaste tubes are recyclable. I can talk offline about that in the Q&A. Okay. Cosmetics containers tend to be a crappy plastic. I'll talk about that in a second. But you know, we can look for, there's a lot of plastic free options at like your local zero waste store or site. Again, they're getting very creative. Like Earth Hero is a good one to look for cosmetics on, which is a local site, but they're based in Boulder. And then hygiene products, like for menstruation products. This is actually an interesting one that I learned about when I was doing this research about the soldiers and the Dixie cups and all of these things that I was talking about earlier, is that hygiene products were a big one that, of course, people who menstruate were very used to not having to deal with, or not depending on, rather, single-use products for menstruation. And so when, you know, like Kotex products came out, they had to be like taught how to throw it away. And it was like this whole thing of reprogramming how people think about menstruation sanitation. And so there are a lot of companies now, it's very common for things like Diva cups and reusable cloth pads to be readily available in stores. Similar story with diapers, which actually at one point might just be its own 2-hour webinar. But anyway, it has a very interesting plastic-free history, and there are a lot of really cool options right now. Again, that said, if that's not doable for you, pick a different one. Okay, and then this is like our eating out, like takeout section, daily life. So receipts, I'm sorry if I'm the first to tell you, receipts are not recyclable hardly ever. They have this thermal coating, whether or not it's BPA free, they have this thermal coating that renders it unrecyclable. And so refusing receipts is becoming kind of more and more of an option. Digital receipts are becoming more of an option, but honestly, like a big hack here is just to plan one shopping trip instead of many, you know, like instead of every day after work buying a few items, just like plan one big shopping trip. And that makes it easier actually to plan out your like reusable bags and your jars and like your list and the transportation. Plastic cutlery, people tend to overthink this one, I think. When people go out to eat, I think like it's like you either have to have like this pre-packaged zero waste like bamboo cutlery or like stainless steel set that is for that, when I think it's just as simple as like we all have cutlery at our house. We can just bring it where we go. And I just keep like cutlery in my car, in my bike bag, like at the office, in my purse, and then I don't have to like buy one. I can just bring them. I also think that camping tools are a really good zero waste hack. Like if you go to REI and get one of their like, you know, like all purpose like sporks or like the Tiffins that are, you know, a bunch of containers in one, all like just camping. I don't know why we separate it, but like we have a lot of camping things are like zero waste and like economically like efficient and space efficient, and you know we can use that whenever. Yeah, I think a spork is a really great one. Paper napkins, again, people tend to overthink napkins. Like you don't need to bring you don't need to like buy a zero waste napkin. Literally bring a napkin from your house, cut up, like if you have an old t-shirt, cut it into a bunch of napkins. Like I do that every time I have a shirt that I can't like donate or get rid of. I cut it up and then I use it as rags and I use it as napkins and I put them all over the place so that I never have to use a paper napkin. I hear a lot of folks talking about receipts in the chat. I'm really sorry to tell you guys, they're really hardly ever recyclable. Pretty much, yeah. So Michelle, all thermographic receipt paper is still coated with some type of paper. So whether Trader Joe's is saying it's BPA free, it's recyclable, it's not. Receipts are just, as of now, as of how they're designed now, they are not recyclable. Okay, and then takeout containers. So this is one that I have been preaching pre-COVID, and so again, do what makes you comfortable. But I think people tend to overthink it. In restaurants where it's not like a nice like sit down, what can I get you? Like I'm your server. If it's one like Noodles and Company, like Chipotle, Illegal Pete's, whatever. If you go in and you order, even if you're leaving, if you order for here, they will most likely give it to you in for here stuff, like in a real bowl with not a bunch of crap, with not a bunch of plastic stuff, but like they'll give it to you on a real plate in a real bowl. And then if you want to take it, you can literally just take your container, plop it in your container and leave. And it's okay. You know, you won't get them in trouble because they don't have to like bring your container behind the counter, which is usually where they like get nervous. You can literally, it's your business what you do once you're served this food. And so if anything, like you're saving them resources. They have this very efficient dishwashing system set up, and they're not just doling out plastics that they have to pay for and that which you're immediately going to throw out anyway. So yeah, I tend to bring like a big Pyrex thing. And again, keep it in your car if you can, keep it in your bike bag, wherever you are. And then, yeah, just like if I go into Mod Market and they give me a salad in a bowl, I'll just go plop, thank you for the food. And so, yeah, jars, like it doesn't have to be like a takeout container. It can look like a jar. It can look like whatever you want. Straws, of course, was like a really hot topic cultural thing a few years ago about, you know, relating to turtles and like sea plastics. And that's where a lot of folks really did get excited about plastics and kind of become aware. And a lot of like restaurants became aware. And so again, with this like privilege, with this, you know, ableism asterisk here, if you are someone who needs a straw, don't feel guilty about needing a straw. But you know, there are a bunch of options now, which I think were born from this movement. There are stainless steel, silicone, bamboo, a lot of different options. Again, like an upon request policy is something to talk about. But again, with straws, I just always want us to have like an anti-ableism lens here, because some folks genuinely need straws and they can't have metal, for example. Okay, so zero waste shopping, it can be intimidating, but it doesn't have to be. So let's talk about how to do it. So getting into zero waste shopping, the very first step is to get your containers if you're looking to fill some containers. So there are a lot of places that you can buy like zero waste containers specifically. that are like uniform and like of different sizes and matching. You know, there's like tall things with like an olive oil thing. Am I eloquent at this point? Or, you know, a glass, you know, sea salt grinder. But you can absolutely not do that if you don't want to. You can save your jars. Again, like I said, spaghetti sauce jar works great. Containers that you buy food in. Try to avoid reusing plastic containers over and over. They're not designed for reuse and they definitely have some negative health implications. So try not to do that with plastic as much. But my favorite hack for this is going thrift shopping for jars and ceramic containers and growlers and a bunch more. They're usually like less than $1 and they're so cool. I want to show you two. I just went thrift shopping at a Goodwill the other day and I got this like matching set. It's like blurring it of these jars. Okay. You get it. But they have like a little spoon, for crying out loud. It's like one of these. And so I put my lentils right in there. And so I didn't have to like go to a zero waste store and buy all these expensive things. I just went thrift shopping, which is another environmentally cool thing to do. I think you'll be surprised if you go shopping for containers specifically at a thrift store. And then finding a store is the next step. If you are, so the ones that I'm going to name are just in Boulder County, just because that's where we are. But at this point, like you might do pretty well if you just search zero waste store in your area. There's a lot. There's a lot of businesses being born of this new wave of consumerism that we've been discussing. And so here we have Simply Bulk, which is in Longmont. I saw people dropping it. Nude Foods Market, which is in Boulder. I saw people calling it out. Two really great local Boulder County stores. Zero Market and Conscious Merchant are in Denver. Conscious Merchant was in Louisville and I think is now just in Denver, but all of them are awesome. All of them have kind of different niches of the zero waste world. And this is, again, not an exhaustive list. Please feel free to share anyone else you can think of that you know of. And then other grocery stores that aren't specifically zero waste stores, but have like expansive bulk sections are like your Lucky's, your Alfalfa's, your Whole Foods, your Sprouts, King Soopers. Lucky's specifically has like their own tear station and jars. Village Trading Company in Lafayette, thank you. And so yeah, Lucky's is set up for you to tear it, but the rest of them, will kind of help you navigate through bringing your own. Which brings us to, so items to buy. So just like, again, as you're going through your audit and you're looking at like, I have all these like flexible pouches filled with, lentils. I think that's what I did. So I just showed you my little jar full of lentils. Lentils tend to come in like a polypropylene or blend pouch, that is not recyclable with plastic bags, is not recyclable regularly. Or in the regular stream. And so I was like, that's a great one to buy in bulk, right? So we got beans, pasta, rice, oats, spices, snacks, nuts, dried fruit, cereal, granola, coffee, tea, sugar, spices, flours, all of these things, we might be used to buying them in a certain package, but these are like essentials. These are all things that we all buy all the time that more likely than not exist in a bulk store somewhere near you. And so then bringing your bulk containers, tearing your container tends to be intimidating to some folks. This is where, people get nervous if you haven't done it before, but we're going to walk you through it right now. It's so easy. So tearing just means weighing your container so that you're not paying for the weight of like this porcelain thing. You're just paying for the lentils. Excuse me. So first of all, it depends where you are. Sometimes they'll have a weigh station where you do it yourself, and sometimes they'll have staff do it. So like, again, Lucky's has like a DIY station. Other places, you'll just have to talk to the folks who work there. And so, by the way, this is mostly if you're bringing your own container, if you're bringing a little bag, it probably doesn't make that much of a difference how much the bag weighs, but there are like bags you can buy that says how much the bag weighs and stuff like that. But so I'm talking about mostly it's for like jars and containers that you're bringing. Okay, so if I'm somewhere that has its own scale, I'm just going to put my jar on it. If I'm at Lucky's, I'm going to put my jar on the scale. And then they're either going to print a little sticker of the weight, which I just keep it, or I put it on my container, or I just read the weight and then I just write it on like a sticker or whatever else you have. So usually I just weigh my jars. and then write it right on the jar, because the weight of the jar itself isn't going to change. So if I'm continually bringing that jar or that container to my zero waste shopping, then I'll just have that tear already on there. So I do it with like a Sharpie or like on a piece of tape or something, but they also have like wax marker or wax pencils that you can write with, and then you could like erase it. And yeah, there's like stickers and things like that. And then I use a Sharpie since, oh, that's what I just said. If there's no scale, just bring it over to the cashier before you do anything, like before you put anything inside, and then ask them to tear your containers. Like they have a scale. And so here's a video of my friend Ari tearing her containers at Simply Bulk, where they do it for you. So she has her little jars. Some of them are reused, some of them are thrifted. And then the lovely staff person is just tearing it and then putting a little sticker on there telling her how much that container weighs. It's literally as simple as that. And then she just takes her jars and then does her shopping. And so with this, like I'm describing kind of the experience at Simply Bulk, for example, but it's going to be pretty similar. Each of the bulk items are going to have their own PLU number. And so it's just identifying, of course, what the product is. And so I tend to do the same product in the same jar. Like if I buy peanut butter every time I go, then I have like my peanut butter jar that I clean out and I bring it clean, but that is the jar that I'm going to buy peanut butter in. So I tend to like keep the sticker on there that has that PLU, just so that like that's the peanut butter one. But you can take a picture of it. You can write it in your phone. Again, you can put it on a sticker. They usually have a little sticker that you just write the PLU number on. And then when they're checking you out, they can be like, oh, you have this much peanut butter, and I subtract the weight of your container because you already tared it. So again, depending on where you are, it's gonna work a little bit differently. Yeah, I knew somebody was gonna say Natural Grocers. They have a bulk section that is just prepackaged stuff in non-recyclable packaging, and they're so cool in so many other ways, and I don't know why they have this. They used to, I remember when I was a child having a real bulk section where you could do things like this. We're going to talk about how to give feedback as a consumer in a second, but yeah, Natural Grocers is honestly not the best place to go for this very specific thing. It was not a COVID change. It happened a long time ago. So yeah, thank you for saying COVID, because we will talk about that in the next slide, but just really quickly. So this is the system I just described is like, if you are in a bulk section, if you're at Simply Bulk, if you went to the bulk section of Lucky's or like Alpha or whatever you are, that's generally how it's going to work. And, you know, if you talk to staff, they are likely to help you. Yeah, Sprouts went back to true bulk after the worst part of the pandemic. Nice. Yeah, they were bagging for a while, but it should be okay now. That being said, do what you are comfortable with. And so health codes. What I was going to say is just that Nude Foods is the other store that I mentioned in Boulder County. They don't have a system like this. Their system is that they pre-pack, like not pre-pack, they like put their stuff in these lovely jars, and then you just take the jar, and then it's a deposit system. You just bring it back, you get your deposit back, and then they just swap it out for other jars. And so it's not this whole tearing system necessarily, but yeah, there are different ways to do it. So, okay, so now health codes. So this is what stands in the way of bulk shopping sometimes. And pre-COVID, just want to be clear about that. We met with the Boulder County health folks, and we learned that, yeah, bringing your own container and just kind of like scooping things into it is generally not allowed. We understand that. Simply Bulk is a small enough store, as an example, that the staff can, like, it's designed for that. The staff can make sure containers are clean. They can keep the scoopers clean. They have funnels so that you're not even touching a scooper directly to a container. Like they're good. They're up to code. They're designed for that. But in other stores, depending on like the staffing and the layout of the store and the size of the store, they might tell you that you can't bring your own container because of health code. So yeah, like you can't bring your own, I've learned this, you can't bring your own container to Whole Foods and fill up the hot bar with it. They get mad at you if you do that. At you, it was me. But gravity fed, this is an important distinction to know about if you are someone who is trying to navigate this in a grocery store. gravity fed, these ones, like the ones that if you, as a little kid, you wanted to pull and have all the nuts fall out for 5 minutes, those ones, according to that meeting, which again was pre-COVID, they're okay. So it's like, it's a liquid or like a nut butter, like how they have at Whole Foods, or like an oil that comes out of a tap. Or these ones that you see here where like you pull the little thing and then the gravity fed, the stuff falls into your container. And because you're not making direct contact, you're not scooping, you're just catching it. That should be compliant with health codes. And so that said, Ecocycle is not the final say, of course, on health codes. Don't like cite me if you get in trouble. But if you're coming up against resistance, maybe doing your shopping at one of the stores that, whose mission it is to help you do that, so that you don't have to worry about getting chastised, is just something to consider. Is like, think about which stores have this available, and then think about which stores are there, to help you do it, who want you to do it. And so then, yeah, lastly, produce. So just as a rule, I think people do what's comfortable for you, but people tend to like just automatically take plastic bags, even if they're people who like would never take plastic shopping bags. They have their reusable bags, but they're just getting, plastic produce bags. And so I, just always buy, like, I'll just take a thing of kale and just like put it in my bag, because like I keep my reusable bags clean. It's going to my, I'm going to wash it when I get home. But you can also like you can buy like those mesh produce bags, which are actually really good at keeping things fresh. You can, just have like a smaller reusable bag is what I do sometimes in your larger one. But yeah, produce you shouldn't get in trouble for doing whatever you want really with your produce in terms of your bags or leaving it bare. Okay, so then building your zero waste kit. This is just something I was talking about, just investing in the basics, but not overthinking it. Like think outside of the box. Like think about like, what is the function of this thing? What else accomplishes that function? You don't have to go buy these beautiful reusable totes and stainless steel water bottles and cotton produce bags. Again, just think, what do I already have in my house that accomplishes that need? Because I bet a lot of us have a lot of things that hold food, that put food into our mouths, that we can drink liquid out of. I think a good rule is just, have a bag, have a smaller bag, have some kind of food container, have some kind of drink container. Like I just keep this in a little bag in the back of my car or like in my bike bag. And then no matter what, I'll have something. And a jar, by the way, can be liquid or food. You can put takeout in a jar. It works really well. Okay. And then next, please, Kai. And then, just reusable content. Again, I think people overthink like the utensils. They think they have to go get this like zero waste specific thing. Just get a fork. Just get a fork from your house and put it somewhere else that's not in your house. And then you can eat it whenever, like you can use it whenever you reach for a plastic fork. You can just use that. And then I just tend to kind of keep, just think about where I usually am when I am in need of these things, where I can put it so that I can have access to them, and keep an eye on, swapping them out. Like just, again, if this fork, if I used it, just take it in, but then replace it right away with a new fork. Don't put it by the door so that you remember, just put it in your car or your bag or whatever right then. Okay, that's your zero waste kit. We're going to talk about sneaky plastics now. So part of the issue is that we're all trying to reduce our plastic use. And some of the time we can't even tell what is plastic, because there are so many plastics out there. You can't even, they're lurking, they're everywhere. So plastic linings is obviously a huge one. Plastic linings show up in things that don't look like hard plastic, that don't look like full plastic. They might look like paper or cardboard, but they have this lining. So of course, a classic example is the coffee cup, a soda cup, to-go boxes, oatmeal container, frozen food boxes, ice cream cartons. These are all things that might look like paper or cardboard or some kind of fiber, but if they're doing a great job of holding your hot coffee or your ice cream, it's not paper, right? We know how paper acts, and that's not it. When you're looking at your audit, when you're examining your stuff, when you're looking to buy products, try to expand your lens of what is plastic. It doesn't have to be a literal, piece of plastic. Think about what has plastic on it, what is lined with plastic, things like that. Biodegradable plastics we'll talk about when we talk about greenwashing real quick, but just know that the word biodegradable when it comes to plastics is something to avoid. It's a big greenwashing flag, red flag. It often means that it's a petroleum plastic that's just designed to break down into microplastics even quicker than it would otherwise, which is already pretty quick. So yeah, if you're looking at a product and it says biodegradable plastic, avoid, don't buy it, give feedback. We'll talk about that. Someone just said milk cartons. Thank you for saying that. Milk cartons are a sneaky plastic in that they look like paperboard. They look like, wax or whatever. They do have a plastic lining. Historically, because of that, because it was a compound material and there was no market for it, there was no demand for it, milk cartons and other, juice cartons, soup carton, all of those had to go to the trash. But because of kind of a voluntary producer responsibility effort on behalf of the carton industry, you can Google the Carton Council, I'll send this out to, they took responsibility for the recycling of that thing. So while cartons are a sneaky plastic, they have plastic, in them, they are still recyclable. And I think actually like in our alternatives thing earlier, I said like opt for, rather than a plastic juice or milk container, look for carton. And so, yeah, it's not plastic free. It's not waste free. It's not single use item free. But it does have this producer responsibility aspect that we don't tend to see in things like plastic milk jug, in that the carton industry is playing a role in the recycling. And if you have a choice between those two and you don't have a glass option, you don't have a reuse option, I would say you can weigh out those facts. The plastic screw-on caps can stay on because they're only going back to the carton people. And these are questions that you can always ask me outside of this webinar too, because I will go off on them. Okay, compostable plastics I'll talk about, but I think my main point here is just that we tend to look at our single-use petroleum-based plastics and think like, what's the easiest thing we could do, right? Fair enough, that's what I've been telling you to do. But as a kind of a society, we tend to be like, what can we do without changing our habits, without changing these systems, without shaking up, the infrastructure? So we tend to take, this petroleum plastic cup and just swap it out with a compostable plastic cup. And so I'm here to tell you that, there are a lot of ways that that those products do a great job in capturing food waste and diverting that from the landfill and things like that. But it's not a one-to-one swap, and we can't be looking at it that way. We can't be taking all of our plastics and trying to swap them out with corn plastics because they're still single use, still linear. There's still a big upstream impact. And so again, look back to the hierarchy. We need to look at reduce, reuse, and then we can talk about single use swaps and stuff like that. But yeah, I just want to at least touch on, like, it's not as simple as petroleum plastic to corn plastic. We need to rethink the whole thing and go back to, again, in living memory, what did we have before we were packaging everything in single use plastics? A newer one to look out for is shrink wrapped cans. In the past, they would print their beverage labels on straight on an aluminum can. And now, again, because of subsidies, it is cheaper to be printing your label on a shrink wrap and wrapping your can in it so that you can just do like these big, you don't have to do a huge set of like whatever your very specific like beer flavor is or whatever. And so the problem is that aluminum is very, very, very valuable in the recycling markets. We want aluminum. We need you to be recycling the aluminum that you have. And in our facility, when we're sorting, the very expensive and very cool lasers that we have that are there to sort plastics look at this shrink wrapped aluminum can and they say, oh, what a lovely #1 PETE bottle. And so they go, pachoo, sort it with the plastics, and we're losing that aluminum. So the best thing to do is just be aware of that shrink wrap, try to take it off if you can, try to give feedback to the producer. I have a page about that. But yeah, just look out for that one. It's a sneaky one. And then lastly, bagasse is sugarcane. You would recognize it as a to-go container, a plate, a bowl that like it's usually white, sometimes beige. It's like rough, like an egg carton. And so a bunch of these came out that are genuinely compostable because they're literally just sugarcane pulp And then a bunch of companies started making the same thing with this poly lining on the inside. And so that is not compostable. That is plastic lined. So look out for that sneaky plastic. It's hard. It's pretty much as easy as like, is it rough like an egg carton, or is it shiny? Is it glossy? Is it, smooth? Okay, so plastics literacy and recycling. When I say literacy, when I talk about plastics recycling to folks, or like when I'm talking about like, looking on the bottom of your product and looking at the number, people are like, you need a PhD to like recycle plastics. And I'm like, yeah, it's a whole thing. You have to be like literate in plastics. And so that's what I'm trying to give you tonight. So we're going to talk about how to know what you're looking at, what to do with it. So we have this quick guide to plastics. I will send it out as its own PDF to you in the follow-up email. Don't worry about it. But it's just like a quick little reference point for you to be able to tell like which plastic is which. I forget which one is okay, which one is really bad, which one is hard to recycle. It's our like pocket guide to plastic. So you could print it out, put it in your pocket, put it on your fridge, keep it as a file on your phone, whatever you want. But yeah, we're just going to go through it right now. Next slide, please, Kylie. Thank you. So to start, if you haven't heard it, you heard it here tonight. I'm sorry to tell you that this symbol, this recycling chasing arrow symbol, is largely unregulated, and it's largely just slapped on whatever the plastics industry makes to make you think that it's recyclable. It doesn't mean it's recyclable, because whether something is recyclable depends on where you are. It depends on what your local facilities and what your local markets are. Those two factors change from place to place. Therefore, the recycling guidelines change from place to place. And when a soda company just puts out 1 billion bottles all across the globe, they do not know where you are and they cannot label it for recycling. They do slap this on there, which is arguably just nothing but a greenwashing tactic. So the symbol, again, the symbol cannot tell you whether something is recyclable. Don't worry about the symbol. Spread the word. The symbol does not mean it's recyclable. People want to argue with us about what's recyclable because of the symbol, and we have no control over who puts it on what. And the plastics industry loves to put it on everything they make. Within the symbol, you'll find a number, and that number is meaningful in that it is identifying literally just the resin, the type of plastic that thing is made up of. So that's what we're about to go through right now. So yeah, that number inside. So there are kind of better plastics, there are really bad plastics, and there's some like hard, like their own category plastics. And so before we talk about the better plastics, let's be very clear that this entire webinar is about breaking free from plastics. It's about, avoiding single-use plastic packaging as much as we can, finding non-plastic alternatives, all of that. Ecocycle stance is like, if we never saw plastics again because we went back to how we were doing it before plastics were ubiquitous, amazing. We would love that. That being said, let's talk about, we're not going to wake up tomorrow in a plastic-free world, and let's talk about how to know how to be more informed in your consumption of those plastics. So number 1, number 2, and number 5 plastics are the ones that are like, if you're going to buy plastic, you have to buy plastic. As a consumer, opt for 1, 2, and 5 over the rest. And again, I'll talk about the rest in just a second, but number 1, 2, and 5 are the kind of less toxic, more marketable, more physically recyclable things, plastics. And so generally, if there's plastics recycling going on, it's largely 1, 2, and 5 because of those reasons. So number 1 is PETE. You're going to find it almost always as a bottle, like a bottle, a water bottle, a soda bottle is almost always going to be a PETE. You see it a lot as a clear plastic. So like also a berry clamshell, like a clear to-go container. These are all likely going to be number 1s. They tend to get recycled into things like shoes, yoga pants, carpets. That's a big one. Number 2 is high density polyethylene. And so it's the classic number 2 is a milk jug. It tends to be like more opaque, a little bit more durable, shampoo bottle, detergent bottle. These are all number 2s. Number 2s and number 5s tend to get recycled into more like durable kind of outdoor plastic. So like a recycling bin, actually, like a, playground equipment, a lawn chair, a kiddie pool, things like that. Number 5 is polypropylene. Polypropylene tends to be in containers and tubs. So like a yogurt tub is a classic polypropylene, but also a lot of To-go containers are going to be number 5s. And, you know, like a big gulp, that's going to be a number 5. Again, the number just corresponds to the resin that the plastic is. So while it doesn't necessarily tell you whether that thing is recyclable, which is something I'll talk about in just a second, what I'm telling you now is for your consumer information. So as a consumer on the consuming end, when you're looking for the packaging that you're buying, when you're looking for your products, when you're about to buy your products, this is information for that, not necessarily recycling. So if you've exhausted your plastic-free alternatives and you have to buy one of these things, look for a number 1, 2, or 5 over the rest. And then again, the numbers just correspond with the resin. So it's just, while the symbol doesn't mean anything, if I make a yogurt tub, I just have to say, okay, I made it out of polypropylene. That's what it's made of. So I'm going to put a 5 on the bottom because it corresponds. That's the code for polypropylene. That's the one that corresponds with that. So the worst plastics, the ones like, please do not buy them. Number 1, 2, and 5, I said like aren't necessarily recyclable. If you're seeing recycling plastics, it's probably gonna be number 1, 2, and 5. 3, 6, and 7, it's a pretty good bet that no matter where you are, these are not going to be recyclable. And so even if you're in a place where, you know, your local recycler is telling you like, oh, plastics number 1 through 7, what they're really saying is just like, if you have something big enough to have a resin number on it, it's likely that we're going to be able to recycle it. But that said, and I have a whole other webinar about this, many recyclers are having to kind of walk back that kind of communication as Chinese markets are closing and international markets are changing. 3, 6, and 7s historically, notoriously are really bad, really hard to recycle. They're really toxic, so nobody wants to put them through the process of melting and reshaping. They're really cheap, so it's not even worth it. And they're not marketable because of those things. So number 3 is PVC. People actually tend to, there's like studies that people tend to kind of like be wary of PVC in terms of like health associations, health implications. And so they'll sometimes just put a V on it rather than PVC to identify it, but it includes a lot of toys, a lot of cosmetic plastics. I'll talk about Trex in a second, Kathy. Yeah, shower curtains, inflatable pools and floats, and of course like tubing and pipes, like PVC pipes. But like the example that I use about the kind of toxicity of PVC is, picture like getting a new shower curtain. When you first unfold it, it off gases, right? It's like, it's stinky. And that's because it's toxic. It's not so good. So yeah, PVC, largely because of its toxicity, is not very recyclable, but also, or it's not really recyclable at all, but also, yeah, it's not marketable. It's not so good. Number 6 is the one that we're really going to fixate on, and that we tend to fixate on, is polystyrene. So people tend to identify this as styrofoam, right? And it's kind of this long story of like the, you know, Band-Aid versus adhesive bandage. Styrofoam is actually like a trademarked term that refers to something completely different. What we're talking about when we say styrofoam is polystyrene, and that's number 6. So number 6 is a resin that includes styrofoam. So it is, you know, a styrofoam cup, a styrofoam takeout container, block styrofoam, all of that is number 6. But it also includes things like this solo cup, this condiment container. These are the same resin. It's still polystyrene. It's just like in a more dense form. The way that I like to tell, I mean, you can just look, you can see a number 6 on the bottom of any solo cup. But I think like I get obsessed with like being able to touch a plastic and being able to tell what it is. And number 6, if you would like to hone this very cool skill, very, very cool party trick, is that if you have a number 6 and you kind of squeeze it, it's going to shatter. It's going to crack. Like picture taking one of these. I'm sure you can picture taking a solo cup or a condiment cup. It's so brittle. It's just going to crack. And so it's not good. It's toxic. It's highly littered resin of all of them. You know, as we know, it's a huge ocean plastics issue, but it's just altogether bad. Please avoid 6 as much as you possibly can. Number 7 is another bad one, because number 7 can either mean PC, which tends to be, again, like the other two, pretty toxic, really low quality. Nobody wants to touch it. It actually includes a lot of baby products, which, what are we doing when we do that? Yeah, sippy cups, water bottles, car parts, just like random things. But number 7 is also the catch-all category. It's also like, I don't know, put it in 7. Like it's something else, put it in 7. And so as you can imagine, since the recycling system operates on markets and buyers, you're not going to buy something that is just other. You don't even know what it is. I'll talk just in the next slide about 7 PLA. But so again, as a consumer, like the more you're getting kind of like conscious of which plastics are around you and what you're seeing and like what the alternatives are, you'll start to be able to tell the difference between 1, 2, 5, 3, 6, and 7. And again, as a consumer, just like really before you're putting anything in your cart, think like, is this a 3, 6, and 7? And if so, is there anything else I can do before buying this? Because it's not going to be good. The other two, so 1, 2, and 5 is like, if you have to buy it, do that. 3, 6, and 7, please no. 4 is the number that I didn't talk about. Number 4 is low density polyethylene. It's the lower density version of high density polyethylene, which I said was a number 2. So number 2 and number 4 are kind of the same resin in different forms. Number 4 tends to be, the charm and other recyclers will take block styrofoam to recycle. That is kind of the exception of number 6 being unrecyclable. Sorry, thank you for saying that. So number 4, similar story. Number 4 shows up almost always as a stretchy bag or film rather than like a hard thing like a milk jug, like a number 2. So number 4 doesn't check the infrastructure box for recycling, because if you put a plastic bag, plastic film through the recycling center, it'll jam up our machinery real nice. So it does, however, check the demand box for recyclability. And Trex, which somebody said earlier about a number 6 or a number 3 maybe, Trex is looking for number 4. So there is a market for this low density polyethylene in the form of this like, composite decking industry. And so Trex and like other similar companies will buy these number 4s and turn them into decking. And so you can do that at the Charm, grocery stores, Longmont Diversion Center. But that's 4 is that just kind of in its own category as a hard to recycle. Number 7 PLA. Wow, we're running out of time. Number 7 PLA is on its own because, as I said, 7 is it's a bad plastic. It's also the other category. When they came out with corn plastics and other like plant-based non-petroleum plastics, they look and act enough like plastics that they label them like plastics. So that means they almost always put the recycling symbol on them, which we cannot recycle corn. Don't put it in the recycling. But they put a 7 on it, which we say don't buy. And so the caveat here is that a number 7 PLA is its own, treated as its own number. So we have 7, which don't. Number 7 PLA, if it has PLA under it, it means that it is a corn plastic, like a compostable non-petroleum plastic. It'll usually be accompanied by like other BPI compostable like labeling and things like that, which I'll touch on in just a sec. But number 7 PLA, it stands for polylactic acid, but if it, a lot of people think about it meaning like plant, and then you can remember. If it says 7 PC, if it says 7 other, consider it crappy. If it says 7 PLA, just know that that's the compostable one. And again, I'll give you this pocket guide to plastics in our follow-up. Okay, and then recycling in Boulder County. This is an overview of what we take. So because we have 1, 2, and 5, we have 3, 6, and 7. 1, 2, and 5, we can't actually, unfortunately, stop there. We have these resins, which are less toxic, more marketable, more recyclable, but they show up in so many different forms and items that we can't do it by number, because sometimes a 5 will be a tub, which we can recycle, we can sort, we can sell. Sometimes a number 5 will be a chicken rotisserie bag. That's my classic example, because we can't sort, we can't sell, we can't turn it into anything. Both of them will be labeled with the number 5. So bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars. Bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars. Everybody, bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars. They're going to be our bread and butter of plastics recycling, because bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars are almost always a number 1, 2, or 5. And we know that they're in a form that we can sort and sell. We can also keep the little plastic caps on them as long as the container is empty. So you can go plastic on plastic because they're made of the same plastic. That being said, Yeah, so bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars, look at your own local guidelines, but just know that like in the plastics recycling world, this is really the bread and butter of like what is genuinely recyclable. We also can take, thank you, Kylie, durable, like we can to-go containers, take-out containers, berry containers, yogurt lids, thank you, Nancy. Yep, these are all upgrades because of our infrastructural upgrades. And so we just don't want polystyrene. We don't want compostable stuff in the recycling, but these containers, as well as along with their lids, whether they go like this or like this, are okay as long as it's plastic on plastic. We can also take rigid plastics if it fits in your bin. This is also something that we take at the Charm though. And that being said, again, recycling guidelines change from place to place. So just the more you can be informed as a consumer and, you know, be buying the numbers that that are more recyclable, less toxic, like that you're voting with your dollar for. Think about the numbers as a consumer, and then think about the item as a recycler. Okay. We just have this guide to greenwashing that I won't go through because we've actually talked a lot about it, and I'll send it out to you because I want to, yeah, we have 5 more minutes. So we'll just skim through this. But as I said, biodegradable, photodegradable, oxo-degradable are all plastics which you should be avoiding as much as you can as a consumer. They're just contributing to microplastics even more than other plastics for the most part. Percent plant material is, yeah, sorry. So Heidi said milk cartons. So this was not an exhaustive list of recyclables that we take in Boulder County. It was just the plastic. So because cartons aren't considered a plastic, they weren't on there, but we do take cartons. Okay, so all of these things of biodegradable plant material, it just means that it's often makes it less recyclable, more prone to microplastics. These are all, they tend to be greenwashing labels. And then, but the meaningful ones, so the how to recycle label is just kind of like an effort to create a general like universal understanding of recycling guidelines. But that said, they base it on what's recyclable in 60% of the country. So it doesn't necessarily align with your guidelines. And so it can get you thinking, it can give you some ideas, it can make you stop and look it up. But please look at your local guidelines for those answers. And then Bpi Certified Compostable is meaningful in that it is, it certifies the compostability of like a corn plastic or whatever you're holding. It'll say number 7 PLA on it if it's a corn plastic, but it'll also be accompanied by Bpi Certified Compostable, which means that you can put it in your composting bin, your industrial composting bin, your municipal composting bin. Same with ASTM D6400, it's the same certification. Number 7 PLA we just went through. And then lastly, percent post-consumer recycled content is a good thing to look for as a consumer. It just shows that whatever you're buying has incorporated recycled material into its production. It doesn't necessarily tell you anything about whether that thing is recyclable at the end of its life, but it shows you that it's buying back the materials that you're recycling in order to add demand, add value, strengthen the recycling economy, and reduce, of course, their upstream impact in the amount of virgin resources that they're using to make that thing. So the higher post-consumer recycled content you can get, the better. Okay, producer feedback. We have some apps. Please feel free to drop more or like email me if you know of more, but Remark and Plastic Score are 2 apps that you can use to give direct feedback to the producers about their wastefulness, their plastic use. When crafting your message to producers, I really think it's important. I know it's really easy for us to be like, how can you not know this? Why do you not care about this? But I think it's really constructive to assume that they're doing their best and and that they are maybe misinformed. Sorry guys, I will do questions, I have like 2 more slides. So know that there's a lot of greenwashing that happens up the supply chain. So I, you know, as a merchant might be buying something that my seller is telling me is assuring me is eco-friendly, and I don't know any better. And so as a producer, I mean, as a consumer, please assume that they're doing their best, assume that they're misinformed, identify yourself as a customer, offer resources, alternatives, information, support. Feel free to always copy like me or Ecocycle on an email. Send us our our website, things like that. And then, yeah, personal divestment. This is just something that I like to throw in there because it is important. As consumers, we're buying plastics and we're like, you know, using gas in our car and stuff, but we have all these investments that we might not even be aware of, which are most likely really directly, you know, supporting the fossil fuel industry. And so I'll send you this link about how to divest in your personal life, but like check out where your money is going. Check out your bank, your schools, your retirement funds, like politicians you're supporting. Where are they getting their funds? Where are they putting your money? What are they investing in? And if it's not, if it's fossil fuels, then look for fossil-free investments, which again, you can find out more in the link that I'll send you. And don't forget that really anything you're doing as a social activist, as like someone who's fighting for you know, inclusivity and equity and social justice in general, you're acting as an environmentalist. Those are the same fight. And so, you know, just know that whatever is calling to you most, that is an act of resistance, you know, to the fossil fuel industry, to the plastics industry. You know, it's building equity, it's building these infrastructures that will get us to that same goal. And then good news, this is a really quick one, just to end on a really high note. The packaging industry is hearing you. We talk to the packaging industry every day, all the time as Ecocycle. They hear you. They're like, what? We have all these, like, we're getting all this feedback. What do we do? How do we swap this out? They're hearing you. They get it. And they're clamoring, they're scared. And some of them are doing cool things. Some of them are very scared. There are more options than ever before. If you're looking out for these swaps, if you're looking out for these stores, there's never been a better time to do that. There's more momentum than ever before. Everyone, you know, people care about this. People like freaked out about straws when they learned about straws. Like, it's just a good example that people care. There is social momentum, there is cultural momentum, and you don't have to convince anyone. If you have someone in your life who's like a climate denier, good news, you don't have to convince them. There are studies that have shown there are enough of us that care. The majority of us care, and you don't have to spend your energy fighting those people who are never going to care. Use that energy to find other people who do care and support each other and share this information. My other good news I did for the last webinar, so I won't touch too much on it, but we just passed 2 absolutely landmark bills in the state of Colorado. Amazing, amazing, amazing. I will send out more information about that, but it accomplishes a lot of our plastic goals that we've been talking about here. And now, I know I went over, I always do. I have so much to say, but if you have time to hang out for questions, we will go ahead and do that. Kylie, I think you can go ahead and stop sharing your screen. Thank you. So I'll stay on and answer questions, but I will also take this Q&A box and then write up the question and the answer and send it out in a follow-up email so that you don't have to, we can make sure everybody's questions are answered and we have time to really consider all of the questions. So wow, I'm really sweating now. I was like, I have been doing really well without talking really fast, but I get excited. So, okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. I think a lot of people are dropping off now because we hit the time. So yeah, to be respectful of your time, thank you so much. I want to reiterate that I will send out the recording. I will send out the chat box so you won't lose any of this awesome conversation and resources. I can't wait to read it. I will send out the Q&A with the questions answered. I will send out my slide deck with my notes so that you can like read through what I said. I will send out every resource that I've listed here, like every link, every like store name, every product that we mentioned. And yeah, we had over 100 people the whole time. That was amazing. Thank you so much for spending your Tuesday night with us. Is it Tuesday? Yeah, I think it is. And yeah, look out for this email. That said, I will go through some of these questions. Okay, Nancy just said exactly what I just said. Amazing. Same team, same wavelength, Nancy. She said about putting retirement money toward plastic-free future, writing to businesses, and writing politicians. Great stuff. Oh yeah, and also guys, thank you so much to Kylie. Let's give a round of applause to Kylie for jumping in at the last minute and helping us so much. As scrambled as I tend to be with all of my thoughts and my notes and my slides, you don't even know how bad it would be if I didn't have someone running the slides. So thank you so much, Kylie. Is silicone considered a plastic, said someone. Silicone is not considered a plastic. It acts a lot like plastic because it is durable. It withstands heat really well. It's awesome. It is made of silica, of glass, sand. So it's the same stuff of sand. And yeah, that's a great question. It looks and acts a lot like plastic, but it is a good plastic-free alternative. Bring back bulk. Yeah, I think we had understandably a big COVID scare that changed a lot of these bulk policies, but I think I'm not a doctor, but I think we kind of figured out more like source contact ways to get around it. Yeah, cartons, nut milk, broth, those are recyclable. And with the lid on, they're very widely recyclable. I'll send out more information about recycling your cartons, but yeah. I didn't really include it as a specific plastic because it's a compound material. It's like not from really the plastics industry directly in the way that other products are, but yes, not so many options for buying greens in bulk. COVID did a number. Yeah, hopefully some of the produce that you were seeing packaged is now maybe plastic free again, or yeah, I mean, now is the time for CSAs, farms, like look out, gardens, like look out for who is locally making stuff that doesn't have to be packaged to get to you. Yeah, someone said, I heard that a research found plastic in our lung tissue. Microplastics are being found everywhere. I have a whole, believe it or not, webinar on microplastics and the number it's doing on our health, among other things. Is there a list of plastic types that rank them from most to least bad? Oh, well, that's, hopefully you asked that before we went over the packet guide to plastics. So 1, 2, 5, 3, 6, 7, and then 4 is in the middle. Okay, somebody said, yeah, plastic production is plan B for the fossil fuel industry since the use of oil and gas produces plastic products and needs to stay in the ground. Shouldn't we be banning plastic and end production in order to save our planet? Yeah, so that's what my first webinar is about. Yes. Silicone bags, plastic lining, Bonami containers. Yeah, have a plastic lining. Sorry. Is it best to use grams versus imperial for container weighting? That is very interesting. I just do whatever they have at the store, whatever they're doing there. I think it's usually grams, but I'm not sure. Options for cottage cheese. I really don't. A lot of the dairy questions I didn't really touch on because I don't eat dairy personally, but I think there were a lot of suggestions in the chat that I'll send out. And again, like local dairy, like Longmont dairy. I don't know if they make cottage cheese, but I think a lot of the like dairy products are a tricky one. What do you store produce in the fridge to keep it fresh? There's actually a lot of tips about this. Kylie has shared a lot with me actually, because she's a zero waste queen. I'll send some of those out about like, yeah, putting it in a jar and like all of these cool things. What percentage of number 2 plastics actually get recycled? So it depends on where you are. If you are aligning with our guidelines in Boulder County, like bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars, and you're giving us what we're asking for in terms of number 2 plastics, they will all get recycled unless something weird happens and like someone throws a syringe right in that load or something. It's very unlikely that that would happen, but yeah, 93% of everything that is coming through the Boulder County Recycling Center is getting recycled. That 7% is just things that folks give us that are not recyclable that we never ask for. This number will change on where you are. And again, as I said, global plastic markets are changing all the time, but they did have a big change a few years ago with the green fence policy from China, where a lot of plastics recyclers were depending on, or American recyclers rather, were depending on Chinese markets to get their stuff recycled, and now have to rethink some stuff. So those stats are changing for other folks. For Ecocycle, we will recycle the number 2 plastics that you give us in the forms that we can take them in. Are compost bin liners compostable plastic? Yeah, the compostable bags, as long as they're BPI certified, should be compostable, but look out for that certification. Okay, containers. What is the legislation on polystyrene? So there's legislation happening around polystyrene all over the country now, like unprecedented numbers of legislation and bills being written and passed. And in Colorado, the one that we just passed that I'll send out, the Plastic Pollution Reduction Act effectively bans food grade polystyrene in the state of Colorado. And so it has to roll out over, a couple years, but we did it. Yeah, number 6 is able to be safely recycled near Portland, Oregon. Very cool. Yeah, there's some folks that can do some hard to recycle stuff with number 6. And like I said, Charm takes block styrofoam, but generally it's a really tricky one and a really toxic one to recycle. Oh, molded plastic is a really good one. So yeah, Thermoform Plastics, which tends to be a number 1, is when they take the plastic and they mold it into a really specific form or like shape, like the tray of like cookies. When you pull it out of the sleeve and there's like a tray shaped like individual cookies. That process that it undergoes in order to mold, to shape it, changes its melting temperature, changes its kind of makeup. And so the folks who are buying that number 1 plastic do not accept that thermoform. So that's a really good point. And one of the reasons why we don't just say like, give us numbers 1, 2, and 5, because they do whatever they want with plastics all the time. What is the difference in Boulder between Ecocycle and Western disposal? Great question. Everyone in Boulder, everyone hauling is bringing recycling to Boulder County Recycling Center because it is a publicly owned, taxpayer built facility. Again, Ecocycle is the nonprofit operated or contracted to run it, but it's a county facility. And so everything that's being collected in the county in terms of recycling is going to come straight to our facility. So you can go by our guidelines, and Western and Republic and One Way and whoever else should be, should be communicating our guidelines, but our guidelines are the Boulder County guidelines. No matter who the truck is, no matter if you're in a business or at your house or on the street, all the recycling in Boulder County is going to come to our Boulder County recycling facility. And so Western is certainly a partner in many ways, and they're a hauler that brings us recycling, and they do other things, but yeah, that's the connection. Does milk carton include shelf stable? Yes. Yeah, all of those, because it's the same like industry. Are the little paperish containers of beans that you cut open at the top recyclable? For some reason, I don't know what this is. I'm gonna think about it. And if this is you, maybe send me clarification. The Pepsi ad, if you're still on here, kudos. I feel like I'm just talking to myself now, but if you're interested, this is recorded, so I'm just gonna go through it. Thanks guys, thanks. No, not that you weren't giving me enough feedback. I just like zoned out and felt like I was just, which I do. I just talk about plastic alone in my house sometimes. The Pepsi ad, yeah, that aired on the Super Bowl about like how many bottles they get back. We certainly say to take that with a grain of salt. I mean, we work with Pepsi, we work with bottling companies and packagers all the time, but as I largely talked about in my last webinar, it's what they're doing right now is not enough. What they're opting to do is not enough. There's a lot of greenwashing happening around bottle recycling, plastic bottle recycling at least, and there historically always has been, and that's what they've always banked on, is saying like, recycle your stuff and somebody else will buy it and turn it into a carpet and problem solved, while we still have the subsidies in place that are making virgin oil and gas cheaper to make bottles out of than post-consumer recycled material. That's going to not be a very serious marketing campaign, maybe in my opinion. Let's just go ahead and say that. How do we get Longmont to ban plastic bags at the markets? Stefan, I have great news for you. We just skipped it and we did it on a state level. It's coming. So yeah, I'll send out information about that bill. But part of it is getting rid of single-use bags across the state. Winco in Colorado is a large selection of bulk. Cool. Very cool. Yeah, okay, this is a great point. Glass bottles are recommended. However, glass weighs more than plastic, so wouldn't glass bottles use more fossil fuels to transport them than plastic bottles? Really great question, Phyllis. Really good critical thinking, truly. Yes, glass is heavy and it often does have a huge ecological footprint for that reason. That is the reason why it tends to not show up on the recycling guidelines in some remote places, because although it inherently is physically very good at being recycled, that transportation piece is huge. You're right. So for that reason, here in Boulder County, we have worked so hard to make a local glass system. So it's circular economy locally, which is what we always advocate for. I have a whole webinar on circular economy, but yes, to that point, we work very hard with many partners to make sure that, so here, if you're recycling glass, it's just going to go to Momentum, which is just like in Broomfield. And that's where they like sort it by color and they like take out more contaminants and all this stuff. And then there are like Rocky Mountain Bottling and Coors, there are all these other players that are still local, who are then turning them into bottles and then sending them right back to the shelves. And because we have this fabulous infrastructure here, we're keeping it a pretty closed loop, which is amazing. And so keep recycling your glass in Colorado if you have it. And it's a good model for other places, but that is a very good thing to keep in mind, that like every material has its own footprint, right? It has its own life cycle analysis that you could do. And while generally glass is, a good plastic-free alternative, it does have that. So it depends on where you live. It also depends on like, are you trying to opt out of plastic because of like health reasons? Are you, like there are a whole bunch of things to consider, and that is a good one. Okay. Yeah, sippy cups and baby bottles. Honestly, I am not an expert on that. I definitely don't want to like fearmonger. There just is some research, I think, to be done on the many things that we're just packaging in these plastics that are known to be pretty toxic. Yeah, do we consult with healthcare institutions? So we do have, historically worked a lot with, like hospital, like Boulder County Health and institutions like that to figure out zero waste alternatives and figure out best practices for like the medical world. And that said, when we talk about things like that, as not a healthcare professional, I'm always like, again, there are so many other things that we should talk about before we start talking about taking plastic away from legitimate, medical uses. Are glass jars recyclable? Are all glass jars recyclable? I'm sorry. So there are kind of two camps of glass, two categories of glass. There's single-use glass and there's like durable glass. One is designed to withstand the heat of a dishwasher, for example. The other is not. Because of that, they have two separate melting temperatures, or at least a range of them. And so if you break your flour vase and you throw it in the recycling and they try to recycle it at Momentum with the beer bottles, your vase is going to be a chunk when they melt everything down. Glass jars are like the single use, like the food packaging jars are, if there is glass recycling in your area, they're going to be recyclable. If you have a durable glass, porcelain, things like that, you can bring them to the charm. Let me click on the garbanzo bean link. Oh yeah, we would call that a carton. I have great news for you. That is called a carton. And if you have carton recycling in your area, which is the case for most of Colorado, at least Boulder County, we can, there's also a chili, like a soup one of that. We would call that a carton. Bon Ami containers, no, are usually the same as oatmeal containers, where it's a compound material made of a bunch of different things. There might be a box, I don't know. Now I don't know all of Bon Ami's packaging, but the tube that is like an oatmeal container kind of looking thing is unfortunately not. Is Boulder County making any other progress on doing more local compost? Yeah, we should have a webinar on that. I would love an update as well. We are working hard to make more local compost infrastructure more feasible, more accessible, more community owned, more public, more transparent, more everything. We are making moves there. I don't have any big updates at this point. Canning jars tend to be right on the edge of single use and durable glass. So, but we last I checked, we asked our Momentum friends about like a mason jar, canning jar, and they said it's okay. It's on the line and it's okay. And the steel lid, even if it has that little seal, should be okay separately in the recycling. If I remove the plastic handle off of cat litter box, are those recyclable? I think it depends on the cat litter box. Feel free to send me a picture or email it to recycle@ecocycle.org. How can we encourage berry growers to stop using plastic clamshells? So yeah, this is also a food waste issue, which we talked about in our food waste webinar, which I will send out. But yeah, there's basically like, where's the line between plastic waste and like unnecessary packaging and preserving food so that we're not throwing away a bunch of dairy, you know, depending on where it's going. Yeah, but I think, you know, the more we work on like dismantling like plastic subsidies and making other alternatives more competitive economically, which they would be without a subsidy, the more we can move toward, yeah, like compostable little baskets and like reusable things and yeah, bringing back a container to your local farmer, to your CSA. Personal containers for takeout restaurant food orders. So as I said, it shouldn't, it's usually a problem if you say, here's my container, fill it up with food. But if you do what I was talking about earlier and you say, for here, please, and then you go dump, then that's up to you. They can't, you know, they can't tell you what to do with your food once you have it on your side of the counter. But yeah, it's typically, you can't hand them something behind the counter because, you know, like what if you hand them something that's contaminated and then you get sick, you can blame them for it. So that's what they're avoiding there. But if it's on your side of the counter in general, you know, do what you do. Is it better to buy silicone lids for glass food storage containers instead of the plastic ones they come with most of the time? Again, it's like whatever feels good to you to opt away from single-use plastic, great. They have a lot of lids. They have like even glass lids now that have like a little seal that you can put on. There's like stainless steel lids. There's a lot of options. That said, you know, you don't have to like throw out all your tops and like replace them. But yeah, there's a lot of cool engineering happening now as we're opting away from plastics. Ooh, those were all the questions. I will still write these up. I still will send them. Our Tupperware lids recyclable. It depends on the lid. If it's a 1, 2, or 5, yes. If it's something weird and it says like a 7, maybe don't put it in. But I am guessing that it would be a number 5 and it would be a tub lid, which we list on our guidelines as recyclable. Okay. Whew, 7:51, guys. Anyone who's still here, thank you. What a trooper you are for being here for so long. Anyone who came in general thank you for joining us for any amount of time. Once again, I'll send out all that stuff. We will have you'll have those Q&As in writing as well. I'll work on that tonight. So much love to you all, and we hope to see you next time. I will email you, so you'll have my email. You can just reply to that if you have outstanding questions, comments, anything like that. You are all amazing. Feel free to reach out to me at rosie@ecocycle.org. I just put it in the chat. But again, you should have my email because I'm the one who has emailed you all the invitations and like all the reminders and all those things. So thank you all. Please don't hesitate to reach out. All the little hearts floating are so cute. Thank you to Ari, whose picture is here. Thank you to Ari always. Thank you to Kylie, who is here tonight. Everyone who's here, go eat a nutritious, hopefully plastic-free dinner and get a good sleep. Feel great about your activism today and your education. Spread the word. You're amazing. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now.